Hello and good afternoon friends, welcome to the CEC-UGC live lecture. Dear friends, with our ongoing series on global environmental conflicts, today we would be talking on industrial revolution. We will be discussing on why is it a watershed in global environmental conflicts, and for this very discussion we have once again with us in our studios Dr. Mayank Kumar. Dr. Mayank Kumar is Associate Professor in Satyavati College, that is the evening college, which is a very essential and very famous college of Delhi University. So dear friends, let's welcome our guest Dr. Mayank Kumar, and let's try to get more and more knowledge from him on the topic industrial revolution. Hello sir, welcome to the lecture.
Thank you Geetika. Good afternoon everybody. As Geetika told us that it's a part of larger series global environmental conflict, and today's topic is industrial revolution and why is it a watershed in global environmental conflict. What I am trying to suggest is that industrial revolution played very important role in aggravating global environmental conflicts. We have been discussing various forms of environmental conflicts, particularly with respect to when I have been speaking, apart from the other experts who have been speaking on this series. But whenever I have spoken, I have basically focused on human resource, in what ways human resources have been seen as part of energy resources. And in that series of lectures on energy resources focusing on humans, industrial revolution marks a watershed. Why I say so? There are particular reasons for that, and I would like to elaborate on that so that you can understand that the future developments which take place after industrial revolution across the globe, they aggravate environmental conflicts. They put the contest over natural resources in a very different domain. Things change a lot. So what I am trying to suggest is that with the industrial revolution, we witness a very new energy regime. A new energy regime which leads to mass production and along with that development of markets. What I mean by new energy regime, if you can recall my lectures, I have been saying that primarily in the pre-industrial societies, the primary mode of energy was natural energy, sources of energy, or biotic sources of energy. Biotic sources of energy include all the vegetation as well as human and animals. And I have been focusing primarily on human resources. In what ways slave mode of production, in what ways feudal mode of production, etc. were a mechanism developed by haves or the privileged section of society to exploit the energy resources available within the human resources. I have been also suggesting that humans are the most intelligent form of energy resources, which means the contest now, the conflict now shifts from human resources to other forms of resources. Please remember, I am not suggesting that human resources were replaced. I am simply suggesting that human resources were supplemented by other sources of energy which were abiotic in nature. Abiotic in nature, most of you will understand if I say the fossil fuel. The new regime moves away from vegetative, from natural sources of energy. The fossil fuels are also natural, but the biotic source of energy where a kind of living being is involved, apart from water and the sun. The other forms of energy which were deployed by humans were basically some kind of biotic. With the fossil fuel, we witness shift to abiotic sources of energy. What is the implication of that? In terms of implication, I have catalogued two very important things. One is mass production and another is development of market. When I say mass production, then please understand, mass production means a production which is now dictating the production processes. Till date, consumption was dictating the production processes, or the demand was dictating the production processes. Now onward, it is the production which will dictate, which will determine, which will influence, which will modify the consumption pattern, which will influence the demand also, which means industrial revolution in a way unleashes new sets of social relations which lead to mass production and development of market. When we will discuss development of market later on, then I will also explain development of market along with a tremendous growth in human population, and humans themselves become important market. So before venturing into development of market, let me elaborate on mass production so that you can understand what I am trying to argue and in what context I am trying to argue. I am simply suggesting that mass production means now machine, any machine or most of the machine can function 24 hours, 7 days a week. Unlike human, unlike animal, unlike sun, the sources of energy were conditioned by time limit. Humans at the most can work for 15 hours, stretch 20 hours, but even that 20 hours cannot be maintained throughout the week. Humans need sleep. Same is applicable with the animals. Animals require sleep. They cannot give their optimum beyond perhaps 8 to 9 hours. Then there is a limit of producing. What I am suggesting is that the pre-abiotic sources of energy were primarily biotic, which means there was a time constraint on them. Now, machine running on coal or oil or any other kind of abiotic source of energy can run 24 hours, 7 days a week unless there is a breakdown. If you are running a machine 24 hours, 7 days a week, which means you require massive amount of fuel, whatever the kind of fuel, be it coal, be it oil, be it wood, whatever, you require massive amount of fuel, because that fuel will keep on that machine running. Machine will not run on the vacuum. Any machine which runs will definitely require raw material, which means now you have to continuously feed raw material into the machine, because only then you will have that amount which you have invested in the installation of that machine will be recovered, or the cost of machine will be recovered only when you keep it running for 24 hours, 7 days a week. Because the greater the production, the greater the possibility of securing or procuring any profit from that and recovering your investment which you have invested in that industry or factory, whatever you call it. What I am trying to suggest that it is not only the energy resources which are in demand or which are required. What is also required is massive amount of raw material of various kind, procured from different parts of globe, which we have been hinting at in my previous lecture when I said geographical exploration opened up new vista of natural resources to human society. Now, with the better ship, better navigation mechanism, now you can procure raw material from different parts of globe, which are now being deployed or used in these machineries. What I am trying to suggest is that the conflict over natural resources or conflict over environment, though production is taking place in a particular country, say in England, but the conflict for producing or procuring raw material for this machine which is installed in England is procured from Africa, from America, from Asia, distant parts of globe, which are now shipped to England to be used in that machine. Give a pause and then think, then consider the amount of mass production which is taking place. Unless it is consumed, unless it is sold, it is a burden on the economy or the investors, which means you need a massive market to use this finished good. You have installed a machine which is now running on abiotic sources of energy 24 hours, 7 days a week, and it is continuously producing. That is why we are telling it is a mass production. Mass production requires mass consumption also, which means unless you develop the market, this production will not be consumed, and if this production is not consumed, then the investment made in the installation of this industry, this factory, this machine will not be recovered. Now, at times your domestic market is full. If you further pump goods in your domestic market which is already full, the prices will crash down. Excessive supply, the prices will come down. Very normal, very regular economic phenomena. The moment prices fall down, your margin of profit will decline, because cost of production is there. It's same. It's the margin over that cost of production which was your income. That income will fall down. The proportion of your income will fall down simply because the market is flooded with the goods. We have example from 18th century, very clear examples that cotton produced in the British textile was shipped towards India or Africa. And looking at the situation in the Indian market and African market, it was very clearly decided by board of directors of those companies that it's better to dump those clothes, those machine-made clothes into the ocean. Because if you supply this, it will distort the market. The margin of profit will decline. So, it was economical for them to dump that in the ocean rather than transporting them into market. Which means you need to develop market not in the sense of market, but in sense of growing consumer tendencies, promoting consumerism. You all are aware of ill impacts of growth in consumerism. It's a global impact now. What we tend to ignore or we are not at times aware of is the fact that this market is propelled by processes unleashed during Industrial Revolution. Industrial Revolution which said that we will be producing 24 hours, 7 days a week. That production needs to be marketed. And if market is not willing to purchase it, then you have to develop market in more than multiple ways. One is looking for the new markets. Africa is explored, Asia is explored, interiors of Asia are explored, interiors of Africa are explored, interiors of America, South and North, both were explored to supply your goods because you have produced it and now you have to sell it. Unless it is sold, it's a burden on you, your investment, which means you are promoting consumption. That is where I say it unleashed a new kind of, or it's a watershed in the global environmental conflict. Environmental conflict in terms of growth in consumption pattern, change in consumption pattern. I need to contextualize what I have been saying, and that contextualization takes me to a few issues which I'll list and then briefly touch upon that, because my concern is not discussing these issues like Renaissance, humanism, Reformation, scientific revolution and enlightenment. That's not my consideration. What I'm trying to suggest that in what ways the Industrial Revolution has its origin, what leads to Industrial Revolution, and what I have missed here in listing is the agricultural revolution of 13th, 14th century that played very important role. We'll be examining that later on also, but let me here briefly touch what I have been saying with respect to Brodale's notion of or concept of biological regime. With Industrial Revolution, we see rupture in biological regime. We have discussed that earlier, so I'm not going to repeat that. I'm simply suggesting that Industrial Revolution becomes that point from where we see ruptures in the biological regime and new kind of regime emerges. If anybody is interested in the bibliography, I have given a classic book by John McNeill, Something New Under the Sun. It's a classic text on energy resources and environmental negotiations, contestation, conflicts and accommodation basically in the 19th and 20th centuries. Let me briefly touch upon Renaissance, humanism, Reformation, scientific revolution and enlightenment. Renaissance leads to reconsideration of traditional knowledge, revisiting the traditional knowledge. What I am trying to suggest is that when you visit the traditional knowledge, when you visit your contemporary knowledge and going back to traditional knowledge or the ancient knowledge, what you are doing is that you are questioning the present understanding of things, present understanding of society, present understanding of nature, present understanding of processes. Which means now you are going beyond the dogmatic practices which have been imposed primarily in Europe during this period by the papacy. Which means there is a rethinking, a new thinking is emerging. Please remember, I am nowhere suggesting that new thinkings were not there in the prior times, in the earlier times. There were. What I am trying to do is that contextualizing this particular rethinking which begins with the Renaissance. What Renaissance does, gradually in combination with humanism, which is part of Renaissance, what we see is that gradually the processes, natural as well as social, are now being explained in terms of universal physical laws, rather than in terms of terming them as divine will. It's God's will, what can be done, or it is this way only. Now, with the humanism, humans are given center stage. If humans are given center stage, which means the thinking capability, the possibilities of raising questions are now given space. That is where humanism plays very important role, which means everything is not centered around God. There is human, and human himself has an agency. That agency is being gradually examined with the humanism. A corollary to humanism as well as this reasoning and the questioning is beginning of Reformation. Reformation within the Catholic Church, within the Christianity, leads to emergence of Protestant and other variants of Christianity. There was a Catholic Church which was challenged, and then Reformists, etc., evangelists emerged. I am not going to that detail. I am simply suggesting that the authority, the psyche, the mentality dictated by Papacy, Holy Roman Empire, was now being questioned, now being challenged. And in Reformation, I must mention the use of printing press, introduction of printing. What printing does is that it liberates knowledge from the clutches or from the control of select few. With the printing press, you can produce multiple copies, and that multiple copies can be circulated across the globe. Please remember my previous lecture on the global exploration. The globe is being mapped, it is being documented. That documentation is now available to residents or the participants who are participating in this kind of global interaction, at times focused on their nation, but most of the time aware of what is going on across the globe. Similarly, their writing is also being transmitted to colonies. So, this printing press enables transmission of ideas freely. What was considered natural, normal, divine in one region may not be acceptable in the same manner in another region. So, what happens that by comparing, by contrasting their practices, their environment with other, now people are questioning the creation of God, and that space was further provided by Reformation. A highly, to a great extent is contested, but I must mention, I am not subscribing to this, but I would like to mention that simply that with the Reformation, it has been suggested that it changes the notion of capitalism also, it changes the nature of capitalism, because now profit making or securing interest on the loan is no longer a sin, which was perhaps declared as sin by the Catholics. Now that is being challenged, which means investment can be made, you can invest and explore and expect return on that, that is in terms of interest. That is now being supported, promoted by new variants of Christianity, especially Protestants. So, a link between Protestantism and growth of capitalism has been argued. I am not going to that detail because that is not the kind of question which I am trying to address at the moment. I am simply hinting that there has been this kind of correlation. But what Reformation does with printing press and with the question of thinking processes, that you can question the authority of church, that enables beginning of, or it is supported by humanism, Renaissance, rewriting, revisiting the traditional knowledge in terms of beginning of scientific revolution. Scientific revolution, what does that mean? There were scientific revolutions earlier also. Any change in science which has tremendous impact, a catalyst, is revolution. We term this phase as a scientific revolution simply because it replaces God's will from the center stage, and explanation in terms of universal physical laws are now being promoted. So, scientific revolution for the first time clearly establishes that the earth is not at the center of solar system. It is the sun who is at the center, and we are rotating across the sun. Traditional Christian cosmic vision always said that earth is at the center, which is creation of the God, and for human and for the earth all other things have been created. This dogmatic notion was challenged or replaced by scientific revolution. You must have read about Galileo, Kepler, etc., etc. They all have worked on these issues. You must also remember the contribution of Newton. all this is part of a long tradition along with scientific revolution, where Earth or the functioning of globe is now being explored, suggested, argued in terms of global physical laws, universal physical laws, which are equally applicable in USA as they are applicable in India or they are applicable in Vietnam. So, the God's will is now taken secondary place and the physical processes take center stage. Another important consideration before we break for the before we stop for the break is enlightenment. In enlightenment, those who can't understand English, let me give a Hindi term, Prabuddhavad. It is Prabuddhata. We will be discussing that later on also. But this enlightenment, in my context, is more important when I use the example of Charles Darwin. He says things have evolved. Earth has evolved. Human creature has evolved. The plants have evolved. Animals have evolved, which means they were not created by the God. So, new thinking on the earth, on the cosmos, on the globe is taking place. A new understanding is emerging, in which it was suggested that enlightenment is the vehicle through which the agency of God is reduced to secondary place and the agency of physical universal laws become important. Another important contribution of enlightenment was the gradual appropriation of science in the various fields of human existence, because now that dogmatic control of church is being reduced and science or the scientific thinking is being promoted. Once again, let me put a caution. It does not mean that earlier there was no scientific reasoning. I am not suggesting that. I am simply suggesting that collectively in Europe, this is the phase when we witness a massive movement. There were academias, there were clubs, there were groups who all were interacting with each other and they were trying to share their knowledge. A classic example, which perhaps will make you understand, gradually, climatic observations from different parts of globe are now being collected, which means the earth is no longer seen in terms of nation or the kingdom or the empire, but rather a global functioning of these processes are now being argued. So, what enlightenment does is it moves away from the traditional boundaries of societies and polities. Other thing which it suggests is that we must be very careful in moving towards greater appropriation of Darwin's philosophy. We must be very careful. I will be examining that when I meet after the break, because then Darwin has been appropriated in another matter also. Let us stop for a break and then we will begin later on. Thank you very much. Good afternoon once again, and let's elaborate on the notion which I have been trying to discuss, the enlightenment in the context of industrial revolution. Why is it watershed in global environmental conflict? That is the part of lecture which I have been trying to discuss, and I also suggested in my previous part of this lecture is that enlightenment or the philosophy proposed by Charles Darwin was misappropriated also. We will be discussing that later on, but let me briefly mention. What it suggests is that only those will survive who are the fittest, which means progress becomes a linear process on the scale where everything which is developed is seen in terms of scientific, industrial, etc. That is being questioned. Now, modern understanding questions that unilinear explanation of development and scientific processes. What we must understand, different societies have different sets of experience in moving towards development. And the notion of development itself, growth itself, has different meaning in different societies. And when it comes to environment, then definitely there are multiple meanings of development and growth. So, we will be discussing that later on also. At the moment, let me extend my argument why industrial revolution should be called a watershed in the global environmental conflicts. As a precursor to industrial revolution, we have seen putting out system where maximization of investment was the consideration. Workers worked on 2 to 3 shifts, and it was a global network of raw material and market, which I have been trying to discuss when I said industrial revolution changed that. The workers were replaced by the machine, which is now running on the abiotic sources of energy, and global networks of raw material and market develop. I have been trying to discuss that. What now I am suggesting is that please have a look at the next graph, which clearly suggests that growth in population. Asia in 1750 had 480 million, and by 1996 it had 3,501 million people. Australia and Oceania had only 2 million people in 1750s, and now they have 29. South and Central America, which had by 1750 only 11 million people, now they have 486 million people. This growth is phenomenal. If we examine Africa, there were 95 million people, now they have 732 million people. What I am trying to suggest is that this is market, this is consumption, and to cater to this, industrial revolution was required. I have also mentioned very briefly the contribution of scientific revolution. If I extend that, scientific revolution, the major contribution of scientific revolution was in medical sciences. Mortality rate declined and fertility rate increased, survival increased, longevity increased, which means now larger number of people are living for longer period of time. Greater number is surviving for a much larger period of time. That by default or by its sheer weight requires more and more natural resources, which means the human population, the growth in human population between 1750 when we locate the beginning of industrial revolution and by the end of last century 1996, we see a growth which is propelling or leading to greater environmental conflicts, greater global environmental conflicts. What I am also suggesting is that this human population is also influenced by, not directly determined by or controlled by, but definitely influenced by. What? Influenced by scientific revolution, influenced by mass production, influenced by global trade networks. Now, if there is a drought in one part of a country or in one part of the globe, or there is a famine, the food can be supplied from other, because it is the market which is driving this. What is happening is that longer people are surviving, much larger number of people are surviving for much longer period of time. If that is the case, what is leading it to? It is propelling, it is pushing the requirement of raw material for machines, for factories, which will give the mass production. Along with this mass production in terms of requirement of fossil fuel as source of energy, requirement of raw material to run these machines, and the market, you also require shipping industry, you require coal, you require railway, and you also have iron at the center of the demand. What I have been trying to suggest is that with the growth in trade network, with the larger pressure to sell your goods, larger pressure to locate markets, you require better ships, much larger ships and better ships. Most of you must be aware of the Titanic. Those who have not seen that movie can see a massive ship was developed. That is the consumption pattern. And imagine the amount of timber used in the construction of such ships. And this is one of the ships which I mentioned as Titanic. There were thousands of several ships which were being used across the globe. English shipping industry, British shipping industry first exploited resources available in England, then they exploited forest resources available on the northern coast of North America, the northern coast of North America, the northeastern coast of America. The timber was extensively exploited. By 1776, USA declares its independence, and by that time the depletion of our resources have already taken place on the northeastern frontier of modern USA. They shift their focus towards India. And if you recall, in India, you see Shimla, you see Nilgiris, you see Assam, all these regions were greatly deforested. Today's heritage trains, we have World Heritage Site in terms of Darjeeling Railway. This was not created for the fun of it. It was basically constructed, it was basically developed to transport the timber for their shipping industry. Timber for various purposes. Gradually, the natural forests were replaced, tremendously replaced with monocropping. A particular kind of trees were being planted, and they termed it as a scientific forestry. Scientific forestry which ensures production of good quality of particular kind of trees. What is the global environmental conflict in this? Elimination of biodiversity. It leads to massive elimination of biodiversity from these regions. Not only in terms of vegetation, but also in terms of fauna also, in terms of avian life also. All this is destroyed simply because you have uprooted the variety of forest. If I can cite a latest, a very recent research on Goraiya, on the sparrows of Delhi. It was declared as a state bird for Delhi simply because it was almost extinct from Delhi. What was the reason? We had cut down on the bushes. And these Goraiyas, these sparrows used to make their nest in the bushes. With the cutting of bushes, the place, the habitat for these sparrows had gone. Imagine, you are reducing the whole biodiversity to monocropping. So the environmental conflict in terms of change in the landscape was massive. I am not yet touching impact on the indigenous people. I am not yet touching on the impacts on humans. I am not doing that. I am simply giving you examples that in what ways these changes in itself led to environmental conflict for the sake of this, for the protection of environment. We had lost variety of flora and fauna and avian life, etc., etc. What does that mean? The biodiversity which was highly dense in this part of globe, that the tropics, was gradually eliminated. Today we witness human-wildlife conflict in terms of human versus tiger, human versus elephant, human versus rhino, etc., etc. It's basically because of the deforestation of these areas. The other reason is excessive growth in the population. The other reason is growth of the market, which requires greater raw material. So it cannot be examined in isolation. All these forces combined collectively put pressure on environment, and which leads to global environmental conflict. Let me give you a few examples on the coal also. Coal, most of you must have read about Industrial Revolution in England, and Industrial Revolution in England was supported by availability of good quality of coal, which usually was not available in other parts of globe. So that coal was propelling the steel industry in England. Iron was available, but to convert that iron, you required its smeltering or its burning in a particular atmosphere, where coal played very important role in converting the iron into steel. Why do you require steel? Steel does not corrode. Unlike iron, it does not corrode, which means you require massive amount of steels. For that massive amount of steel, you require timber to be burned along with iron ore, so that you have a good quality of steel with you. Steel is being used in the manufacture of railway tracks, railway, various kind of machineries. Various kind of machineries are basically built on iron. Massive growth in the consumption of iron is taking place. Iron mines were explored and they were being devastated. I will cite another example, not for iron, or I could not get for iron, but I could got it for copper. In what ways? Copper mining was changing the face of landscape. It's on the picture on your right is copper mining, and on the left it is industrial logging of forest. In what ways? Industrial logging of forest as well as mining changes the whole landscape wherever they are implemented. What I am going to suggest, that this in itself is a global environmental conflict. There is no need for us to look for specific cases of global environmental conflicts, because they themselves are manifestation of conflict over natural resources. Let me go back to coal and remind you all that when Germany was defeated during First World War, Germany's mineral-rich area, Rhineland, was taken over by victorious power. That is global environmental conflict. And there are historians who have argued that this kind of deprivation of their natural resources for themselves was perhaps one of the cause for the next World War. That is the level of global environmental conflict. That Germany's natural resources in terms of iron, in terms of coal, were appropriated or controlled by England. Simply because, not by England, by the victorious power, because this will propel their industry, this will propel their industrialization, but it also leads to deprivation in another country. I have briefly mentioned railway also. Railway should also be mentioned in terms of the massive requirement of timber. You require timber for sleepers, you require timber for wagons, and you require timber for burning in the engine. So wherever railway went across the globe, any part, wherever railway went, wherever, it led to elimination of forest from that area. It is massive deforestation whenever it goes. Anybody who is interested in that can read Mahesh Rangarajan's Fencing the Forest. It's a very beautiful description in what ways railway destroys the forest and changes the nature of landscape. Once you change the nature of landscape, once you, as I have been trying to argue, when you eliminate the biodiversity, it leads to a different set of environment. And that is what I have been trying to term as global environmental conflict. The other provisions which were made for industrial revolution and a manifestation of global environmental conflict is plantation economy. Plantation economies are developed in Americas for agrarian resources, for raw material for their industry in England, industry in Europe, and to propel that they had slave trade. Slaves procured from Africa were used as labor in the Americas, and the raw material was produced, agrarian production was produced, which is being consumed in the European continent. Is it not global environmental conflict? Human resources from Africa, I have discussed that in my previous lecture. Human resources from Africa, landscape of America, and consumption in England. Please remember, Europe cannot consume all that which is being produced. So they require market. In terms of market, they are developing new regions. So industrial revolution definitely unleashes a different kind of destruction. And that is why I say it is watershed. It leads to breakdown of biological regime as well. The other important contributor to industrial revolution, particularly in England, was colonization of India. The Diwani rights of Bihar, Bengal and Odisha gave enough surplus, enough capital to England to propel their industrial revolution. They had secured, Diwani right means to right to collect the land revenue without any obligation. They were not given the Faujdari, they were only given the Diwani right, which means they were expected to collect the land revenue which was produced in Bihar, Bengal and Odisha. What is the implication of that? With this revenue resource, you have enough capital at your disposal to run your industry. Even if industry does not give you return in back, even if you are not able to run it profitably, since you have not invested from your own pocket, you have procured it from in India and using that as a bulwark to install your industrial revolution, what we witness is that the industrial revolution is given that bulwark, that support, that initial push by the revenues procured from Bihar, Bengal and Odisha. Please remember, India was the most precious colony in the possession of Britain, simply because the kind of resources which are available here, one, resources, second, they were market also. Anybody who is interested can read Bipin Chandra in this context and will realize that by the beginning of 18th century or till the beginning of 19th century, India was industrialized compared to other countries across the globe, including England. We were industrialized. But a massive deindustrialization takes place, because unless Indian handicraft industry is destroyed, the factory produced goods or factory produced textile of England cannot be sold in India or other parts of globe, simply because the cost of production was much lower when it is produced in India by the handloom and the labor without the use of machinery, compared to the products which are produced on the machinery. Initially the cost was much higher. So they had to systematically destroy Indian handicraft industry. It is termed as deindustrialization of Indian handicraft industry. It takes place in the middle of 19th century, which means not only revenues being secured, but the industrial production possibilities of India are also diminished, which means industrial revolution in a way develops in England, but it is using resources available in India, both in terms of human market as well as raw material. The other and classic example becomes indigo, and all of you must be aware of the Gandhiji's visit to Champaran. It is plight of indigo planters that he goes there. Indigo is being produced simply because indigo gives you the dye, the blue dye, the natural dye. Till synthetic dye was developed, it was the indigo which was used as a coloring agent. If that was being used as a coloring agent, so England required, the textile industry of West required coloring agent, and that was being made available by indigo. Why indigo is important for us? The cultivators were forced not to cultivate their crop for the food, rather they were forced to produce indigo crop, which means they cannot produce their own food from their own land. They were forced to produce indigo because the industry of England, the industry of Europe required this coloring agent. That is what I am terming as global environmental conflict. To sustain one industry there, the textile industry of West, the Indian landscape is now being changed. The peasantry, who is basically subsistence farming, is now forced to cultivate indigo, and that too was extorted. Let me briefly touch few more issues of industrial revolution, and then we will be able to conclude this. That is the beginning of oil age. A picture is on your screen will come, and that shows in what ways California and other regions where oil were available once again unleashes another set of energy regime. What happens? That along with coal, now oil is being used. If oil is being used, oil gives less smoke. So gradually you are shifting from coal based to oil based. And please remember, the other important implication of oil was development of internal combustion engines. Most of the vehicles which you have, they are run on internal combustion engine, which means the oil which is very easily portable, which is easily transported, is now being used in the transport industry extensively. And we see a movement towards global environmental conflict where the Middle East now being contested extensively. So much so, it is contested so much so that ultimately nationalism becomes a very important issue in control over these territories. With the unification of Italy and Germany in the late 1860s and 1870s, we see later on they both, as a nation, they aspire for sources of raw materials, sources of energy resources, places of energy resources, so they partition Africa. Africa was partitioned. The resources available in Africa, both in terms of raw material, energy resources, as well as market. All this is being gradually appropriated by different political powers, national powers in Europe, and they control this. Please remember, this was the period when America declared its isolation. 1812, they declared that no European power is allowed to venture into South or North America. So they are in isolation. So European powers are now exploring Africa and interiors of Africa. These changes, these search for new kind of resources leads to changes impact on landscape, degradation of landscape, deforestation, expansion of agriculture, double cropping. It also leads changes in the waterscape, canal, multipurpose river projects, tube wells, more importantly, Suez Canal and Panama Canal. They were also developed during this period of time as an impact of Industrial Revolution. Before concluding this session, let me briefly mention a very important point, and then we will conclude, and that is importance of expansion of agriculture. We tend to believe that agriculture is a natural phenomena. No, agriculture is human intervention in the landscape. I have been arguing that in my lecture, earlier lecture also, which means with the growth in population, you require food. That food is being gradually produced by expansion in agriculture. If expansion in agriculture is taking place, which means deforestation is taking place. One is industrial requirement, another is human consumption requirement. But the impact is that the deforestation is taking place. When you grow agriculture, when there is a growth in the agriculture, you require water, which means the water resources were also being exploited. That is why I have clubbed them together. The canals, multipurpose river projects, and double cropping in various areas where single cropping was a natural phenomena. Because with the availability of oil, you have tube wells, and there is a possibility of greater and greater exploitation of your agriculture resources. So what we witness, that Industrial Revolution unleashes a different kind of social negotiations, a different kind of conflicts which are global in nature, and put environment at the center of these conflicts. This include forest resources, water resources, mineral resources, human resources, etc., etc. So please remember, what I am trying to suggest is that Industrial Revolution marks that very important watershed where new kind of global environmental conflicts are emerging and new sets of relationship with the nature emerges. That is what I would like to say for this session. Thank you very much.
With this note, thank you, sir. Thank you so very much for giving us a very, very precious sessions once again. And dear friends, you can send your feedbacks as well as your suggestions on info.cc@nic.in. We would be meeting again very soon.
There is a bibliography at the end. Please have a look at that, because that will help you in understanding this lecture also. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.